Hey everyone, Elizabeth at As I Lay Reading. Welcome to my channel. Today I thought I would do the BookTube Newbie Questions tag. And I just wanted to thank John at Nicholas of Autrecourt for telling me about it. And yeah, I thought it would be fun to answer these 10 questions. First, I just wanted to get through some preliminaries. I thought it would be a good place here to make an announcement that I've made a small website for tracking my reading. So I just have a section at the top that says currently reading, and it just shows what I'm reading. And then on the bottom it says on my radar, which is kind of vaguely like a to-read list, except that I'm sort of a very capricious reader, so I don't tend to stick to lists much, but they're just the books that I'm sort of thinking about maybe reading soon. And yeah, I thought it would be a fun way to keep track of what I'm doing, especially since I'm not really sure that I'll make a video for every book that I read. For example, right now I'm reading The Fall by Albert Camus, and I'm not sure that I have enough to say about it. So it's just a way to see what I'm reading and anticipate what I might be talking about soon. And so yeah, now we can get right into the questions. I just got this list randomly online from Googling, so I don't know if this is actually, I don't know if there's only one tag or if there are variations, but this is the one that I found. So number one says, why did you start this channel? And I think ultimately I sort of wanted a kind of a reading diary. I've tried to keep reading diaries in the past, but they're kind of a lot of work and I never really kept up with them, partly because I would always feel that I had to write this really formal, long review of what I was reading. And that can take a lot of time and in a way it doesn't really necessarily give a great impression of what it was like to read the book or what your initial reactions were. That's more like sort of writing a little paper on everything you read. So I thought it would be interesting to try a different kind of medium where it's more just off the top of my head and what I've been thinking. The other reason I started it was just that like a lot of times when I watch videos or even read things online, I have like so much to say in response that I think writing a comment would sort of be, with so many ideas, would sort of be obnoxiously long and kind of asking too much of other people to read all of that. So it's nice to have my own space where I don't feel that I'm sort of impinging on other people's time, but it's their choice to come talk to me if they want to, or not talk to me, but, you know, see what my thoughts are. And so it's a little bit more freeing where I don't feel like I have to be quite so concise. And the last reason I think is I do think that what I've found since just posting my very first video is that face-to-face communication is a lot more personal. I think anonymous commenting online doesn't quite work so well, or anonymous writing online. I've tried places to have book conversations before. I have a now defunct newsletter. Trying to have conversations about literature on Reddit, it's practically impossible. And I think having a face, just simply having a face to match with the ideas, really helps with actually disseminating those ideas. Having a civil, a civil and sort of mature conversation. I think it's easier face to face. So those are my main reasons. For number two, what are some fun and unique things you can bring to YouTube? I thought about this for a long time. All I put on my notes was sparkling personality question mark. This felt a lot like an interview question, and I wasn't really sure how to answer. I'm not a professional critic. I'm not a professional writer. And I think all I can promise from this channel is just to be another voice in the chorus of people giving their opinions on books. I can promise my own idiosyncratic point of view, but not really anything else completely unique. So I can offer only my own commentary. For number three, what are you most excited for about this new channel? Definitely 100% the community. I'm really shocked and happy that there's just everyone's so friendly and welcoming, and there's so much activity, and it's really fun. I don't think I've ever spoken this much about books in my reading life, to acquaintances ever, and I think it's really fun. And I sort of made this channel kind of assuming it would be mostly just I don't know really quite what I expected, but I kind of thought it would just be mostly me talking to myself in a way, I guess. And that has just been completely wrong in the best way. So I'm really excited for the community here and building more bridges with more people, learning more about new books I've never heard about and new perspectives on books that I have heard about. It's really, really fun so far. And I think the community is definitely what's driven me to keep going. So number 4 here is, why do you love reading? And I would put the addendum other than entertainment, since of course we all read for entertainment. I feel that reading is really one of the few places in life where you can really dilate on a single topic. There's no time limit. There's no one waiting for to make sure that it's done in a certain amount of time. There's no rush. And I really like that you can sort of choose a topic and you can go deeper and deeper and deeper into that topic, and there's never any sort of limit to what you can do with a particular topic. And I think being able to go into as much detail as you like on any topic is something that we really don't get pretty much anywhere else in life. The other reason I really like reading or love reading is that it's intensely private, and not just private as in you're having a private conversation with the author, but what I mean is that your own reactions are entirely private. It's an activity that you undertake that's entirely unwitnessed, and your responses are genuine responses. You can actually see how you feel about things because you're not performing in any particular way. You read only for your own edification. And I think combining that with the fact that you can really delve deep into different topics makes for a really interesting, colorful experience that just has a lot more variety, I think, than with other media that we might encounter. So with TV shows or films, these are things that need to appeal to many, many people, maybe millions of people. But a lot of books are sort of written by one person, essentially just for one other person. And you can get very niche topics, narrow topics. You can get really different sorts of exploration. I mean, even when it comes to fiction, right? You can get things that are not crowd pleasers. You can get things that appeal to only a handful of people, and yet it still exists. And I think that's makes for a much more enriching and interesting and strange sometimes experience. And you can sort of really explore in a way who you are. I know it's kind of cliche to say, but it is true. And I think I really like that about reading, that you're not sort of trying to have a particular response, but you're merely experiencing in the moment, responding as you really do respond. It's only kind of tangentially related, but a while ago, like a year ago or something, I went to an art gallery that was on a small college campus, and most of the paintings there were by up-and-coming artists who were recently in school, who are now trying to become professional artists, or were already professional artists but were quite young. And I noticed that as I walked around in the gallery, most of the plates next to the paintings didn't just have the name of the painting or what the materials of the painting were composed of. Almost all of them had sort of an explanation of the painting or what the painting meant, or it sort of was telling you what to feel. And I found that very offensive to me. It was sort of like, don't you dare look at this painting without having, don't have an unsanctioned thought, dear God, here is what you're supposed to get from this painting. It sort of was like a very transactional, we give you this painting and then you feel this. And I thought that was really kind of odd. And what I like about books is that precisely that's not the point of books. That's not the way books generally work. So, and then sort of the last two reasons I love reading is I guess they might sort of seem a little bit opposed to one another, but on the one hand, there's the efficiency and density of reading. If you simply want to learn about a topic, there's probably no better way than to read about it, partly because of what I was talking about before, that you can get really, really detailed into it. And of course, learning in person is another great way of learning. But I think the efficiency and density of reading is something that is extremely valuable that we can't really quite get anywhere else. And that's, I guess, sort of opposed to the other reason I like reading, which is the aesthetic beauty of reading, that it doesn't have to be practical, that it's art, that we can appreciate how beautiful writing can be, and we can get real joy from how beautiful writing is. And so I would say those are some of the main reasons that I love reading. For number 5, what book or series got you into reading? I had to think about this for a while, because I feel that in my life anyway, I just always had books around me. My parents were both very, very well-read people, and at some point very early on in my life, my family inherited all of my grandparents' books on top of my parents' books. And so we just had this house completely stuffed with books that were always around. They were mostly uncategorized, strange things, old volumes of popular mechanics, all sorts of books, weird books in different languages that I couldn't read, just all over the house. Actually, I sort of remember, I grew up in this sort of grand old Victorian house, which I guess, reflecting on now, I guess perhaps a middle-class family probably couldn't afford today, but these were different times at the time. And in that house, we had this big wooden front door, and there was an inlay of glass, an oval glass in that door. And so you could kind of see into the front of the house from the door. And every so often, not very often, but every so often, some people would show up at the door and knocking at the door, thinking that the house was the public library. And it was always really sort of embarrassing when we'd have to explain this is just a private residence. And so that's kind of like how many books were all around me growing up. And I think one thing the best thing my parents ever did for me, either intentionally or unintentionally, I'm not sure, is that it was never really imparted to me that reading was a virtue, or that I should seek out reading as something that would be a great a great quality or something. Reading was just another activity like watching TV. It was just something you could do, and there was no sort of moralistic charge to reading. And for me, I think that just made reading so neutral and normal for me. And so, I can sort of remember, I do have some early memories of reading that I thought about, and I remember there was a room upstairs that nobody would ever really go into. It was technically the guest room. It was originally my eldest brother's bedroom, but my eldest brother moved out to go to college when I was very young. And so it was technically the guest room, but nobody ever went there. And I remember in that room was where some of the strangest volumes were. For whatever reason, there were a lot of ghost stories in there, and a lot of my grandfather's old books were in there. And I remember on one of the middle shelves, there were these great big bright green volumes, these thick volumes on one of the shelves. And sometimes I would kind of sneak in there. I don't know why it was a secret, but it was. I would sneak in there and I would pull those bright green volumes down, these huge volumes. And I would sit in there and I would open them up, and it was like this secret world, because it turned out that those green volumes were sort of these compendia of these old 19th century magazines, and they just had essays upon essays of little articles on little political kerfuffles that I think are long forgotten and too insignificant for even a historian to write on. Funny little anecdotes, observations, and things. And there was something really magical about it to me because, number one, like I said, it was a private experience. It was a complete secret. I don't know why I never told anyone that I looked at these magazines, but they were so amazing. And what really amazed me about it was that I was this unthought of audience. When you would read it, they would assume that, of course, you know what's going on in the colonies, or you know what's going on here, because it assumed a contemporary reader. And there was something so funny about it to me that I was like this 21st century, or I guess maybe at the time 20th century kid. I don't remember how old I was when all of this happened, reading this. And there was something interesting and amazing about holding this really old thing in my hands that was sort of never meant to be seen by my eyes, and sort of snooping and looking into what people in the past were reading. And I think that might be one of the ways in which I first got interested in history. Just that feeling of looking in through a window into something that's completely unrelated to you. That really fascinated me. So that was definitely an interesting early reading experience. Another thing is, I remember I would always sort of, little kids sort of get into things. And so sometimes I would pull down volumes from the shelves and I didn't know what they were. And one of the early ones that I can remember is I remember pulling down a volume of Keats. And I had no idea who Keats was. I didn't know what Romanticism was. But I loved the poems. And in that way that I think kids have such a high tolerance for, maybe even desire for repetition, I would just read those poems over and over and over again. And it was in that way that I started sort of accidentally sort of memorizing some of them. And I remember there were two poems I really liked most. One was Ode to a Nightingale, and the second was a poem entitled To Sleep. And I remember I would read them over and over again. Oh, soft embalmer of the still midnight, shutting with careful fingers and benign our gloom-pleased eyes. And, it wasn't just Keats, an author, or a single poem, but I remember there was one single line that really stuck in my mind, and it was the last line of To Sleep, which was, and seal the hushed casket of my soul. And that line just struck me so vividly. I would just think that line over and over again to myself, and I didn't know what alliteration was or meter or anything like that, but I think it was the sound of that line, and seal the hushed casket of my soul, that sort of stuck in my mind so saliently. And I think that was probably the first time that I realized that there was something, that language itself could be beautiful, that it was probably the first time I think that I ever had a real aesthetic response to language. And again, I don't know exactly how old I was, but I carried that poem with me for a long time. And I remember another thing, I do remember, another discovery I had was another time I pulled down a volume from one of the shelves was William Blake. So I remember I couldn't stop reading Tiger, tiger, burning bright, in the forests of the night, what immortal hand or eye has framed thy fearful symmetry? And it was almost like a drum beat or like a chant for me. And when I would walk around the house, I would sort of silently recite it to me to the beat of my steps, tiger, tiger, burning bright. And that was another one that really affected me very early on. I also discovered early on the stories of Edgar Allan Poe in the same way. So I remember The Mask of the Red Death. It just gave me chills, that story. It was absolutely terrifying for a little kid, and I think I read everything that was in that volume. I don't know. I doubt that was all of Edgar Allan Poe, but it was some small compendium of his stories, and I really liked those. I was a romantic little kid reading Blake and Poe and Keats. So I remember that, and I do remember one thing that was funny about this is that those books were there my entire life. So you would kind of get to know where certain books were and what certain sectors were like. And for example, I remember that Les Fleurs du Mal was directly across from the kitchen, and I remember I didn't really understand French or anything at that time, but I knew enough to know that that meant the flowers of evil, and just the notion of evil flowers was so terrifying to me. I just forever saw that book as sinister, and it sort of frightened me. I would never pulled it down from the shelf. I never touched it, and I never ever read it. I just knew that it was right there. And there were the art books in the lower right, and there was the Shakespeare in the front, and I remember sort of this neighborhood of books, and I liked sort of luxuriating in that. And another early memory I have is I remember that in my childhood bedroom, my bedroom overlooked the porch, the front porch of the house, and the roof of the porch was just under my window, and it was sort of steepled like this. And I remember sometimes if I really wanted solitude, I would climb out my window, and it was angled at just the right way. It was almost as if it were designed that way for someone to lay down there. And I would climb out my window and I would lay down on the roof, and so often the tiles, which were kind of more like rubber, the tiles would still be warm from the day. I would usually climb out just after sunset, and I could lay there and could think about things, and generally I would think about sort of nothing, but every so often I could sort of review the things that I had read, these poems that had moved me so much, and I didn't even sort of realize what I was doing. But in a way, I think that was sort of the closest I ever got to kind of, sort of the sentiment of pure existence, or as close as I'll ever get. And so those are some of my early reading experiences. Number 6 is what questions would you ask your favorite booktubers? I had several questions. Number 1, I wanted to ask, other than Shakespeare, do you read plays? I asked this question because I actually feel a little bit ambivalent about the questions surrounding performance versus reading plays. I can't come up with, I don't myself have a very strong opinion of it, and so I'd like to ask my booktuber, my favorite booktubers, or any booktuber or any person who stumbles onto this, what you think of that, and what do we make of the fact that, at least in the English language, our most beloved writer, Shakespeare, actually was a playwright, not a novelist like it might be for the Russians or the French, but simply a playwright. And in a way, I think that plays are so overlooked today, and I wonder why that is the case, or what other people might have to say about that. Question number 2 would be, do you read literary criticism after finishing a book? And if so, who are some of your favorite literary critics that you've read? I definitely like to read literary criticism after I read a book. Sometimes it's even more fun than read the book itself, I think. But I don't always I'm not very disciplined about it, and I don't always know where to go. So I'd love to get some recommendations from others if they're interested. And I know a lot of people don't like literary criticism, and I'd be interested in hearing also about, why you like it, why you don't like it. That would also be interesting to me. And then the last question, what hobbies or activities do you most enjoy outside of... No, this is my own question. Okay. Yeah, what hobbies or activities do you most enjoy outside of reading? So, I yeah, I'm curious what else we as a community get up to when we're not when we don't have our noses deep in a book. So yeah, I'd love anyone who wants to comment on that to provide their answers in the comments if you want. I think that would be interesting, not just booktubers, but anyone who happens upon this. I'd be interested to know. Question number 7. What challenge do you think starting a booktube channel will be the hardest to overcome? I think the most difficult is just what I'm experiencing right now, which is camera shyness. It's still really unnatural for me to speak to a screen. It always feels very natural when you watch one of these videos because you think, of course, the person is speaking to me. But it's a very different experience when you're actually trying to record. There's no feedback of any kind, and you're just sort of rambling and trying to keep it together in a single monologue. So that can be difficult. I think another thing is that I'm a very comparatively slow reader compared to most people who I think are booktubing. So I'm not going to be able to post as many videos as I think many people do. And I think a concomitant point to that is that I guess another problem could be that I could simply run out of things to say. I only have read so many books that I really have so many thoughts. And so yeah, I guess those are some of the harder challenges. Number 8, when did you start reading? I guess, I think I already covered that there's no real start to my reading, but I do feel that I sort of started being more deliberate in my reading, I guess, where I was trying to sort of read certain things or, get through certain lists or something around 2018. Since then, I think I've sort of learned that I'm a very undisciplined reader, and I'm just going to go wherever the breeze blows me. But I think it has since then at least encouraged me to think a little bit more about what I read and to try to, just be a little bit more thoughtful about my reading. So yeah, somewhere around 2018, I guess I would say I became more serious about my reading. Number 9, where do you read? I thought about this a bit and I realized that I don't really like reading in public. I'm not a big reader. I can't read on planes, for instance. I get too sleepy. There's no place in public that I really enjoy reading. I mostly like to just read at home. I love my wingback chair. I can't read in those. I know there are those cool, much nicer looking low back chairs, but those hurt my back. There's nothing to support your head, so I need something all the way up. So I read in these sort of we have more than one. I read in this sort of grandmotherly wingback chair, and I think those are great for reading. And I read at my desk. I think probably my favorite place is to read in bed, and sometimes I might have some really, really, really soft instrumental music, like maybe some really quiet jazz on while I read, but mostly I kind of like to read in silence, which I think some people find unnerving. But I think it's helps me get really into the book. Number 10 here, what kind of books do you like to read? That's a really large question that took a lot of thought on my part. I guess there are certain different kinds of modes that I like to read in. So one mode would definitely be interiority. I don't care much for literature in which all the characters are archetypes meant to represent something larger, or the story is a big allegory, so none of the characters have any personality or meaning. I like books in which we explore inside of characters. Those are really the most interesting for me. And I have here an example, not quite of something being an allegory, but just something where it's difficult for me to engage with because of the lack of sort of internals, I guess, in the characters. And that would be Bertie and Wooster. I know a lot of people like the Bertie and Wooster novels, and I could just never get into them because there is nothing sort of going on inside. It's sort of one caper after another. And so you kind of know immediately when you start reading this type of book that there's not going to be any growth or change, and there are just very few opportunities. There aren't very many. There's not a very wide swathe of things that could happen. There are only so many things that are going to happen in a Bertie and Wooster story. And I don't mean to rag specifically on Bertie and Wooster. It's just what occurred to me. But and I understand that like a lot of the joy of it is it's sort of this like cozy thing where you have certain expectations and you're reading it because it's funny and stuff. But I just meant it as an example of the kind of thing where you sort of know that the horizons are limited in a very particular way, and it's difficult for me to engage with that because there sort of is no real. It's not that these guys don't have personalities, but there is no interiority in stories like that. Another mode that I like is sort of books that establish very strong atmosphere or ambiance, whether that's a historical novel, historical fiction novel, or just really good writing that can take us to a particular place or to a particular group of people who have their own particular culture between them or something. That can be very interesting. The third mode I kind of really like is books that explore the language itself, that try to be beautiful, and that includes experimentation. I really like experimental literature to a degree. I think when the writing is really a vehicle for the author to show off his amazing vocabulary or great learning, or when the book is written almost entirely just to be obscurantist or disorienting for the reader, I think that's not really in good faith. And so I don't really go for that kind of writing, like when the writer is not your friend. But when it's a good faith experiment where it's not sort of a vanity project for the writer. I know that some of this sounds scathing, but I don't mean to be scathing. I'm just sort of trying to be specific. When it's written in good faith, I really, really like experimentation. When I know that when there is some communication going on between the author and the reader, and when I know that I can glean something from what I'm reading, then I'm willing to put in a lot of effort, and then I really like it. Another mode that I like is books that explore ideas. So I like books that, maybe can perform a sort of like thought experiments. This is something I would really love to see more in science fiction. I think a lot of science fiction does a really great job in this, and I would love to read more of that type of science fiction where you can explore very weird or different ideas, ways that society could be set up, ways that things could be working. I think that stuff is really interesting. And yes, I know those types of books generally don't have the most interiority, but they have a compensatory theme. So those are also really engaging. And I know that, I still think that stories that don't have any of these characteristics can still, of course, be really fun, entertaining, really valuable. These are just the types of things that most affect me, that are most likely to get my interest. So yeah, that's the end of the questions. I just wanted to say thanks again to John at Nicholas of Oterchor for telling me about this tag. And yeah, I hope to see you all here next time. Bye-bye.